right. Hello, everyone. Are you sick of hearing about blockchain yet, or do you want to learn a little bit more? More? All right, more. OK, so I'm not going to talk about crypto. I'm going to talk about something totally different, and so maybe a different side of the coin that you've maybe heard most about in the blockchain space. I'm going to tell you that the next wave of blockchain is in enterprise blockchain. So quickly about me, I run IBM's Blockchain Ventures Fund. So we invest in and partner with startups in the blockchain space, mostly enterprise startups using Hyperledger and permission networks, but some exceptions to that. I've also been an entrepreneur 3 times. I've been at other venture funds, and then I've been an entrepreneur in big companies. So a little bit of everything. So I have a lot of empathy for founders, especially working with a big company like IBM. And if you don't know who IBM is, we're a big old tech company, basically. We've been around for over 100 years. We have 400,000 people around the world, about 80 billion in revenue. And we have a very heavy tech culture, well, R&D tech culture. So we have huge amounts of researchers doing things like looking at the future of AI, of blockchain, and of the new thing is quantum computing, as well as all the other stuff that we've been doing for many, many years. So what I want to talk about today is 3 things. So very quick level set on blockchain. What is it, and is it real? So I like to give this overview before I talk, because maybe you've only heard about crypto or public blockchains, and so it's a little bit of a different interpretation of what a blockchain is, and I think it's helpful to hear that explanation. Then I want to talk about enterprise blockchain and why we're really excited about the future of enterprise blockchain. If you're listening to the hype and the crash and all the stuff that's, that people are kind of getting really low on in the blockchain space, it's not really, it's mostly the public chains and the crypto world, although I do think that will come back. But enterprise is still slowly but surely growing and doing some really cool stuff. And so then I want to end with 5 enterprise blockchain use cases that I'm really excited about. So hopefully it'll show you why this is still an industry to be excited about and look at. So very quick blockchain 101. OK, so blockchain is a shared, replicated, decentralized ledger. So if you think about it in a business context, it's if you're interacting with different businesses or different participants every day, you're interacting with your bank, you're interacting with your customers, you're interacting with your vendors, that is a business network. And so a blockchain basically takes all of the players in the business network where there's assets being transferred. So if you're changing hands, assets are changing hands with someone, so meaning you're paying your vendors. That is an asset. It could be something more tangible, so maybe you're shipping inventory to someone, that's also an asset. Maybe it's something more intangible, like data. You're sharing data with someone. So that's an asset that's changing hands among the business network participants and in transactions. And then basically what blockchain does is it creates smart contracts that govern the rules of those transactions in either an open, if you're a public blockchain ecosystem, or a closed ecosystem, or semi-closed ecosystem, what we'll talk about with permission chains. And the ledger's nothing new. It's been around for hundreds of years. It's basically a system of record. I always say that blockchain is actually really boring. It's like accounting. So I don't know why everyone's so excited about it, but it's this is how blockchain works. So it's magic, right? It's not magic. It's pretty simple, actually. So someone logs a transaction that involves some sort of asset. That could, again, be currency, it could be data, it could be a physical object. And that transaction is then sent to a peer-to-peer network of computers. And there are different ways to validate that transaction. So I'm not going to get into proof of stake, proof of work, governance, all the stuff that could potentially validate a blockchain transaction. But just know that there are multiple options. But somehow the network cryptographically validates the transaction. That transaction is then bundled together in a block. That block is then put on a ledger, and that ledger, now that block cannot be changed. So it's there forever, it's immutable, it can't be changed. You can certainly edit it, so if you have something you don't like, you can adapt it, right? You say, this rule isn't working anymore, we're going to change the rule, but there's an audit trail of all of that there. So you cannot change what happens on blockchain, so it gives you a lot of trust in the transactions that occurred and trust in the data. And then the transaction is complete. And so the ecosystem has talked a lot about permissionless or public blockchains, and so that's probably what maybe you started with. So it's a network, it's a blockchain that anyone can join. It can be anonymous or pseudonymous, so you don't necessarily know who's transacting. You might know a screen name or a pseudonym or something, or you might not know at all. Anyone can view the transaction, so it'll be hashed. You won't necessarily see what the transaction is, but you can see that it occurred. And so it's a public chain, the record is there. And so that is great. But certain industries, especially, we do a lot of stuff, for example, in the ad tech space. advertisers don't want people to know how many transactions they've done, even if they don't know what the transactions are. So there's some downsides for that, especially in business, but again, it can be very good in a public setting for the right use case. And then there must be a token or a cryptocurrency in a public chain because it's public, because it's decentralized, because you have different users doing the cryptographic algorithms. You have to incentivize them in some way to use that computing power, and so there must be a token or a cryptocurrency in order to pay and incentivize that person who's doing the cryptographic algorithm. So there has to be a cryptocurrency or token in public chains. In the private or permissioned world, only those with permission can join. So it has to be, there's usually an onboarding process. You have to meet certain criteria. There's a governance body that kind of determines who's going to join and who's not. The real identity is known, so you know exactly who you're dealing with at all times, and their identity is usually verified. There's no need for mining or tokens. So the consensus is the consensus algorithms are done by governance, essentially. There's a board, and the board decides how things are going to be decided, and then you can implement it from there. And then also it can be permissioned, right? So it might be one network, one blockchain, but I might not be able to see everything that happens. It's the same chain, but I only have a view of the things that I need to have a view of. So here's a little chart. So you can see all public blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum have a token. And so there's nothing in that bottom category because there are no public chains that do not have a token. There are most of the mostly used permission blockchains don't have a native token. So Hyperledger, Quorum, Corda, some others, you can certainly build tokens on top of them, but they don't have a native token. And then there have been a couple of cryptocurrencies that are particularly built for permission chains like Stellar and Ripple, and we have a partnership with with Stellar. Oops. And so those are specifically for payments on blockchains, on permission blockchains. So end it with a visual. The visual basically is that this is what it looks like to operate in business without blockchain, meaning you have lots of different business participants. They're all transacting, so all of these nice little lines are transactions and assets being transferred, and everyone is keeping a different book of records. So all of these different colored records are different books. There might be reconciliations. People might have different accounting practices. They might have errors. You don't know, but they're all different, and so it can be very inefficient and expensive and vulnerable to attacks. The blockchain is essentially one ledger where everyone writes to the same blockchain, and it's all the same thing. So there's no reconciliations. It's all the same ledger. Again, you might have visibility into one piece of it, but it's all writing to the same thing. And the exciting part is, like any new technology, it can make things better, faster, cheaper, but it also unlocks a whole bunch of stuff that you can do now that you couldn't do without blockchain, and that's the exciting stuff that we tend to look for. So there's blockchain. Yay, blockchain. And then if you want to learn a little more, we have some free resources here. You can download our Blockchain for Dummies, which is about enterprise blockchain specifically. There's a bunch of videos and use cases and things that are all free. OK, is blockchain real now? So 66% of organizations are already experimenting with blockchain in some way. So that could be proof of concept. It could be production level actual products that are working. But it's real. It's happening. People are actually doing something with it. There are some big numbers that I don't need to bore you with, but basically the one that I like is that 3.1 trillion with a T in business value is expected to be added by blockchain products and services by 2030. So that's not too far away. At IBM, we've done a lot of this stuff. So we've been around for more than 5 years. Our blockchain practice has 2,000 people. We've done more than 700 blockchain projects with enterprises all across the spectrum. It's not just fintech. It's not just financial services. It's not just supply chain. It's a little bit of everything. So the previous speaker was saying that there's no agreed upon use case, and that's because there's not one use for it. It's not a thing, right? It's not a blockchain company or a blockchain product. It is a tool that you can use in your tech stack to solve particular problems. So it's like AI would be the easiest equivalent. There's not an AI company. What does an AI company do? You don't know. It does something that happens to use AI in the product because the AI actually helps you to achieve your goal. So next wave of blockchain is enterprise. So most of you startups are, either you're selling to enterprise or maybe working with enterprises in some way. The reason I like enterprise is because now we're at a point where the technology is starting to mature. It's still early. We still have developer tools and other things that need to be built, but it's starting to get to a point where it's actually working, and we have enough traction and enough maturity in the products for it to be real. There's more corporate adoption, so things are actually being used in the corporate setting, and they're actually being used in a way that that is potentially scalable, although there have not been any real scaled, massive runaway successes yet, although I think we're getting there, and I'll share some that I think are interesting. The VC investment, while it's been spotty in overall blockchain, enterprise blockchain VC investment is going up. Practical blockchain is one of Gartner's top 10 trends for 2020, so they're excited about this. Practical blockchain, I think, means things that are able to be used now, so it's things that are ready and available at the moment. By 2023 is when they say it will be ready to scale. So again, we're still in the early phases, but we're getting closer to be able to scale blockchain. Okay, so I'm going to skip through some of this because I'm a little low on time, but basically, and I have a cool video that I want to show you at the end. So larger enterprise are leading the deployment, so this is happening in big companies. And that's definitely a little bit different. Usually the big companies are the slower to adopt, but actually the bigger companies, over 5,000, are the ones that are actually spending more time and energy implementing blockchain. And then the last trend I'll share is that I'm seeing move to applications instead of consulting. So there's always infrastructure. Infrastructure is about the same. So the three categories of blockchain that we typically look at are infrastructure, applications, and services. Right now, services has been dominating because people are testing. They're hiring people to help them get up to speed. But the application layer is what's most exciting. So if you think of it as like a infrastructure is the app store for your iPhone. The applications are all the apps on top of that. And that's actually what we spend most of our time investing in and working in at IBM. Okay, so watch this space. There's more coming. Again, early days, but there's a lot of real enthusiasm and real money and real resources and really smart people working on this. So it's good. It's going to be an interesting ride. So I want to share 5 enterprise blockchain use cases that you should be aware of. And some of these have applications in the consumer world as well. The first one is supply chain. So this is a really easy no-brainer. If you have a complicated supply chain, especially with multiple parties who are all doing transactions and maybe don't trust each other in the same way, so they're not sharing all data, all information, they might have different incentives. Blockchain is a really good tool to provide transparency and efficiency in supply chains. So 2 projects we're working on at IBM. One is called Food Trust. It's with Walmart. So it's basically tracking the food supply chain from the point at which a product is loaded onto a SKU is loaded onto a truck. We built a little app so the farmers can scan it in as it goes through the supply chain to get to the grocery store shelf. And the first reason for this was, and there's a lot of different potential applications here, but the first reason we did this is for public health and public safety. So if there's an E. coli outbreak with romaine lettuce, we can very easily pinpoint where it came from and only recall those items. And you can see that a lot faster than you can with the current supply chain, because otherwise you have to do reconciliations and ask for room for data, and there's no single source of the truth, whereas with this there is. The other one is called TradeLens, and it's about the global shipping supply chain. So it's a partnership with Maersk, which is a big shipping company, and we connect and automate all of the things that go through the global shipping supply chain, which I didn't know much about until we started working on this, and it is very complicated. It used to take something like 200 documents to change hands to ship. The example was shipping flowers from Morocco to Spain, which is a very short trip. And we've gotten that down to, I think it reduced the time by something like 80% and the documents to 20 instead of 200. So really big efficiencies that are happening there. And then we're starting to build some really cool stuff on top of it that is making it even more efficient. Number 2 is digital assets. So evolution of money, we've probably heard this before, is, when paper money came out, people thought that was crazy. Crypto is now, people still think is crazy, but it's still very early days and it is becoming more the norm. And when you see things like China, which is tokenizing their currency, their renminbi, then you're starting to see how real this can be very, very fast. So the things that I like in the enterprise space around tokenization that are not cryptocurrencies necessarily are tokenizing assets for fractional ownership. So this is the 2 use cases that you'll typically see are real estate. So this is the St. Regis in Aspen, which was the first piece of real estate that was tokenized and fractionalized, meaning it opens up a whole new world of investors. So instead of just being a big real estate developer can buy this, it means that maybe I have an attachment to this, but I can't afford the whole St. Regis Aspen, I can buy a little sliver of it. I can buy 0.01% of it, which then allows you to own a piece of it. You might also get a utility piece of it. Maybe you get a special holiday there once a year. Maybe you get to go in a VIP section if you visit. You can do that. I don't think they did that with this one, but any sort of token is a programmable piece of money. So you can put in other things besides the value of the money into the actual token, which opens up a whole lot of interesting things. The other thing is art. So this is Andy Warhol's, I think it's called 7 Electric Chairs. This was the first piece of art that was tokenized. And maybe I'm a collector, but I can't own a full Andy Warhol piece, or I don't want to. Maybe I can bundle them together and bet on pop art or impressionists or whatever I want, and you can bundle it together as an investment. The interesting thing that we're working on with a startup called Securitize is tokenizing corporate debt. So IBM issues about $13 billion of corporate debt a year. There's some friction in the process. It takes a couple of days to settle, for example. So if you tokenize that debt, you can reduce those inefficiencies. And when you're talking about billions and sometimes trillions of dollars, this can be really, really interesting. So keep an eye on this company. And tokenize all the things. Okay, land titles. I really like this one too. Sometimes the most interesting ones for blockchain especially are the most boring. I'll start with the company example. There's a company called Figure out of the Bay Area. It's Mike Cagney's new company, so former founder, CEO of SoFi. It's the first blockchain unicorns. They just passed $1 billion in valuation, I think sometime mid last year. So what they do is originate and securitize real estate loans, specifically HELOCs, so home equity lines of credit. You could do it with mortgage-backed securities as well. And they do that on a blockchain, but that origination and securitization process is not that complicated. Where they actually have a big problem is with the land titles, because in order to do the transaction, you have to get the physical land title from the state or local jurisdiction organization, some of which are digital and some of which are not. And so depending on the jurisdiction you're in, you might get it quickly, you might have to get a fax of a paper copy of something sent to you. And so what they're working on, they actually spun out a new separate company called Provenance, which is digitizing the land titles. They're starting, I think, with California, and then they're expanding. But this is a lot of work. And it will take a while for them to do that, but once they do, there's all sorts of really interesting other use cases that can happen from digital land titles. So reducing corruption. There's been some really cool projects in Ghana, in the country of Georgia, and in Honduras around preventing corruption with blockchain-based land titles, because they were having trouble with, the registrar giving land to their cousin without actually having paid for it and things like that. And so this is actually helping reduce that. You can increase transparency and efficiency for buyers, so I can see the full provenance of who owned the property that I'm buying beforehand. You can verify who it's owned by, and some things that seem obvious, but there's still problems with that. And then lastly, it helps with smart cities. So governments are very interested in this because you can get a very clear view of how things work and how you can improve the efficiencies of cities and include more tech if you know where the pieces lay. Okay, digital identity. A nice slide by EY with a lot of words. But basically, this is verifying the identity of a person or an entity very quickly on blockchain that's shared among other people. So the example that people like to use to make it really easy to understand is, I have an ID. In the US, I can't drink until I'm 21. When I go to a bar, they want to see my ID, but do I really need to give the bouncer my address, my birth date, all of my picture, everything I need, or do I just need to let him know that I am over the age to go into the bar? And so something with blockchain, you can verify, yes, no, I'm able to do the thing that I'm trying to do without giving all the other information that you might not need to release to that particular entity. Some really interesting enterprise use cases around this are KYC and AML, so know your customer, and anti-money laundering. So you can identify the entity of the business that you're operating with, verify all the facts around it, very quickly understand who you're dealing with. You can do things like proxy voting, so if I'm voting on a particular issue, if I'm an investor, then I can do that remotely. I can be verified very quickly, and there are some real issues with that. The use case that I like the most, although it's a little bit sad, is that unfortunately this is the situation in the US with active shooters. And when you look at governments who have emergency response teams, they don't have emergencies all the time. That's why it's an emergency. And so they had friction in the databases that they were using where people didn't have the login information that they needed to address the situation when seconds matter. And so we built a system for the state of North Carolina with the CIO there on, especially when there's an active shooter situation, that people can just verify their identity using blockchain where they don't need to remember their passwords. And so things like this can reduce friction in business, it can reduce friction in government, and especially when there's really critical time-sensitive things, it has a big impact. Content provenance, so this is the last one, and I'm probably gonna go 30 seconds over, so I'm sorry, because I wanna show you a video. The problem, this is my favorite project I've been working on, and this applies to both business and enterprise and consumer, but the problem is that people don't trust the media. They don't trust any content they read on the internet these days, for good reason. Check this out. Oh, nope. Play video. Who has seen a deepfake? Anyone? Yeah? I'll show you a deepfake.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or, how about this, simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele.
The movie producer.
This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. That's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of fucked up dystopia. Thank you, and stay woke, bitches.
So this was from 2 years ago, and the technology has improved since even that. And so what we're working on with the New York Times is using blockchain to authenticate content around the internet. So you can see what the source of the content is, where it's been, how it's traveled, and you can verify where it came from and all the metadata associated with that. So things like that can have an implication for business and can have an implication for consumers as well. And with that, I will end. Thank you very much, and here's my email address if you'd like to connect.